Hello. So, as you can see, I am not a graphic artist. By day, I am a data scientist, and my background education is graduate level economics. So, you can imagine that I was kind of shocked to wake up on November 6th to find the entire world talking about tariffs. What are tariffs? Are tariffs good? Are tariffs bad? Who pays for the tariffs? What's going to happen to the job market? What's going to happen to our prices? All of that stuff can be a little bit confusing if you don't have a background in it. So I just put this together to explain some general intro level economics and especially tariffs. If you already know the difference between quantity demanded and the demand curve and the quantity supplied and the supply curve, and you already know what can move those curves around, then go ahead and skip to the tariff part, which I've put down there. That's the right timestamp. Thanks, and I hope this helps. Have a great day. Okay, we're going to draw a basic plot for supply and demand curves. The vertical axis is our price, and the higher you go on that line, the higher the price. Horizontal is our quantity. Further to the right, the higher the quantity. We're going to start with demand and use the market for t-shirts as an example. We don't know the actual price and quantity, but we're going to find out by drawing supply and demand curves. Here's a basic demand curve. What does it say? It just says how many t-shirts everyone in the economy would want at any given price. It's very low price. Lots of people want lots of t-shirts. Very high price. Not many people want t-shirts. So this line is what economists call the demand for t-shirts. It's not the quantity. It's not the quantity demanded. It's not the quantity supplied. It's the whole line. We'll find out the quantity demanded in the actual price when we add the supply curve. So we'll do the same with supply. Let's say you own a t-shirt company. If the price of t-shirts were very low, you could only make a small number of t-shirts and break even. Low price, low supply. Imagine the price went up a little. You can now make a little more t-shirts and make a little more money and still break even. Very high price, you break even on the next batch of t-shirts. Your last batch is now very high, so you make more t-shirts. As the price gets higher, more and more people enter the market. Some companies even stop what they were doing. Maybe they were making parachutes or quilts or flower pots, and they start making t-shirts instead. Connect all those dots and you have the supply curve. That's supply with a big S. Suppliers can't go below this line for long without eventually going broke. It's not an option for them. So we have our supply and demand curves. From here, it's easy to find price and quantity demanded. The quantity demanded in a closed economy, meaning there's no trade, always has to equal the quantity supplied. T-shirt companies can't sell a bazillion t-shirts at $500 each unless consumers are good with that. And consumers can't buy a bazillion t-shirts at $1 each unless the suppliers are good with that. So the quantities have to be equal where the curves meet. Here's the quantity of t-shirts in a closed economy. We'll call that Q. And here's the price. We can't leave this point for long, if ever. The only thing that will move price and quantity is changes in these lines. Big D demand and big S supply. So what can make quantity go down and price go up without moving the demand curve? Yep, supply has to change. Not quantity supplied, but some kind of supply shock that makes the companies produce fewer t-shirts at any given price. Let's say there's a drought and the price of cotton goes up. T-shirt companies can't make the same number of t-shirts at the same price and still break even. Changes in the cotton market cause the entire supply curve to shift. Fewer t-shirts are supplied at any given price, and the price goes up, and the quantity demanded goes down. Notice the demand curve hasn't changed. So the overall demand for t-shirts in the economy is still the same line, but because of a change in the supply curve, the price has gone up, so the quantity of t-shirts that we want has gone down. So back at the start, same thing can happen the other way. Maybe labor costs go down, maybe there's a bumper crop of cotton, maybe there's a tech improvement in a completely unrelated industry that makes your machine maintenance cheaper. So you're able to produce more t-shirts at any given price. So the supply curve shifts out and the price goes down and the quantity goes up, even though the demand curve hasn't changed. But the demand curve can change too. So a famous pop star announces t-shirts are the next big fashion statement. Demand goes up, that's a shift in the demand curve out. And in this case, the price went up, but quantity demanded also went up because it was driven by a change in preferences in favor of t-shirts. Back at the start, demand can also go down. Here, a public health director announces wearing t-shirts causes brain damage. So everyone wants fewer t-shirts. The demand curve shifts inward. Everybody wants fewer t-shirts at any given price. The supply curve hasn't changed, but the equilibrium price drops, and so does quantity. Fewer people buy t-shirts even with the lower price because of the change in demand, the demand curve, and t-shirt companies produce fewer t-shirts. There's a lot of forces at play here. The shape of the curve might change, how far out or in it goes might change. Changes in preferences will move the demand curve. Shocks to the supply chain for t-shirts will shift the supply curve in. Improve technology or cheaper costs will move it out. And for the most part, these things kind of move around in very small, short, subtle ways, and things are relatively stable unless there's a major shock like a pandemic, for example. So my experience, if you're a student of economics and you're just starting out, the biggest hurdle on day one is just knowing that one basic concept. Understand the difference between demand and quantity demanded and supply versus quantity supplied. We're about to move on to tariffs, I promise. Lots of people already get the basics of supply and demand curves, so you might have skipped to this point, but there's two more concepts you need before we can move on to tariffs and the overall impact of the economy. If you skip the intro to supply and demand, welcome. Just to make my drawing life easier, I'm switching to straight lines. One reminder before we move on, suppliers can never go below the supply curve, that red line, or at least they can't stay there for long or they'd go broke. It's off limits. So to understand anything about tariffs, you need to understand consumer surplus and producer surplus. Here we go. We're starting back at our basic graph. Here's the price and here's the quantity. This is the quantity that is both supplied and demanded. They have to be equal in a closed economy. And if something occurs to move one of our lines, prices and quantity will adjust until everything squares. By the way, this yellow box represents the total value of all t-shirts produced and consumed in this closed economy. It's just price times quantity. So let's pretend the price is $10, just so we have a number to use. Doesn't matter what the number is as long as it's where the supply and demand curve meet. Now remember way back in the beginning, there was that tiny group of people willing to buy a handful of t-shirts at umpteen dollars. There they are. But look, the price is only $10. These people are very happy. They would have paid a lot more, but they don't have to. That's called consumer surplus. This light green box under that yellow circle is the value of the consumer surplus for the first small amount of t-shirts consumed. And here are all the t-shirts even more people would have bought at a slightly lower price, and underneath that, still more consumer surplus. We can keep going like this until we fill the entire area in. So this is the measure of consumer surplus. It's the whole area above the price and below the demand curve. And guess what? There's producer surplus as well. Remember back at the beginning when we were talking about supply curves, and there's a small group of companies out there able and willing to sell t-shirts at very low prices. But again, the market price is $10. They're in the business to make money, so they're very happy about this price. And that blue shaded area above that point is their producer surplus on the first batch of t-shirts. And we can repeat that again and again. Some companies make more t-shirts, which gets progressively more expensive. Other companies are the market, fill in that whole area, and that is your producer surplus. Everything above the supply curve and below the equilibrium price. So here we are. We have our producer surplus, and we have our consumer surplus. Think of the total of this triangle as a net benefit to society in the market for t-shirts for having the right amount of t-shirts at the right price at equilibrium in a normal functioning market. This is very important. It's a big part of what makes the whole thing work. Okay, so now we understand the difference between demand and quantity demanded and the difference between the supply curve and quantity supplied. If you watch the beginning, you know a few examples of what can move those curves around. This is, again, what it looks like for a single economy that doesn't trade with anyone. We'll call this economy the Republic of Us, or US for short. So what happens to the US diagram when we add trade with the rest of the world? The general level of demand for t-shirts doesn't change. That's demand with a capital D, the line. The line is still the same. Same with the supply curve. It's still the same. So what does change? Well, if us wasn't trading with anyone, the price would still be $10 where those two lines meet. But guess what? There's a whole world out there. It turns out that globally, combining all of the supply and demand curves in the whole world, there's a world price of t-shirts. With trade, we're going to say the global price of t-shirts is $5. That's $5 below the market clearing price if us was a closed economy. A lot of interesting stuff happens here. So quantity supplied and quantity demanded no longer have to be the same within our economy because it's no longer a closed economy. It's an open economy with trade. So a world price of t-shirts, how many t-shirts do we make locally? I'm not assigning numbers to these, but here in the drawing, it's a lot less than when we were in a closed economy. It's where the supply curve meets the new world price. Is this bad? No. We've been trading a long time. Most of these aren't jobs lost recently. These are jobs that went somewhere else to begin with. A lot of companies reduced t-shirt production a long time ago, and since then, other companies never bothered to enter the market. What happened to all those resources? They went on to make something else. Flower pots or video games, hats, microchips, you name it. They're off making something of more value at which we're more efficient relative to other countries. Let's look at our producer surplus. It used to be here. In an open economy with a lower world price of t-shirts, it's now here. Producer surplus is lower. In a silly sense, they're less happy than before. But more accurately, there's fewer of them, and most of them never existed in the first place. What about the demand side? What about consumer surplus? What happened to the quantity of t-shirts we're consuming with an open economy and a world price of t-shirts at 5? Well, it's gone up. Our local demand curve hasn't changed, but we're able to buy a lot more t-shirts at a much lower price. Our total cost has almost certainly gone down. We're spending less on t-shirts. We can afford more t-shirts, and we have money left over to buy other stuff. What other stuff? I don't know. Everyone gets to decide for themselves. Maybe for someone else it's better food. Maybe for someone else it's more concert tickets. Maybe for someone else it's more savings. Even better, look at our consumer surplus. Here it was at the old local-only equilibrium price. And here it is at the new world price. That's a lot of consumer surplus. And here they are together, consumer and producer surplus together. That's a lot bigger than before. In a closed economy, and summed up, the total of the two used to be this big, exactly equal to the size of this yellow triangle. Now it's that plus the increased consumer surplus here in blue. That blue triangle measures the total benefit to society in the market for t-shirts with an open economy instead of a closed economy. Consumer surplus is much larger, and yeah, the producer surplus is lower, but where did it go? It's off making other things of more value at which we are more efficient relative to the production of t-shirts. So here we are at equilibrium in an open economy with a world price of t-shirts at half of what it used to be. So let's say the Republic of Us has an election. Newly elected President Larry doesn't like this at all. He wants to show the local t-shirt industry how he's going to help them. We're all going to be rich. So who pays President Larry? How does this work? And what happens to the economy? President Larry says, I'm going to get back at all those mean people sending us cheap t-shirts. Every time they send us a t-shirt, they have to pay us 80%. T-shirts are $5. You terrible people sending us cheap t-shirts have to give us $4 every time a single t-shirt gets shipped this way. So what do those mean t-shirt people say? They say, no way, Larry, t-shirts cost $5. That's the global price. If you want t-shirts for $5, we'll keep sending them to you, but no way in hell are we going to write you a check for $4 just to send you our already cheap t-shirts. You can't make us. And you know what? He can't. No country can make companies of another country write them checks for selling cheap goods. But President Larry made promises, and he wants to make the t-shirt companies happy. So what are his options? He sets an import tax. That's also known as a tariff. If you buy your t-shirts direct from abroad, you pay the $4 tariff. If you buy your t-shirt from your local big box mart, then they pay the tariff and pass some, or maybe all, or maybe even more than all of that cost on to you. A tariff is just a tax. There's gas taxes, sales taxes, capital gains tax. What about import taxes? A tariff is an import tax. It's a tax that anyone locally who imports a product with tariffs pays to bring it into the local economy to the local government. So Larry sets t-shirts at 80% or $4 per shirt. Here's the new local price with Larry's tariffs. World price is still 5, but add the $4 tariff and we have a local price of 9. So now we have to redraw everything. In an open economy without tariffs, the world price and the local price were the same at $5. That put local production here, and the total value of all locally produced t-shirts was this box. Also, the quantity of t-shirts consumed was here. This box is the total value of all the extra t-shirts we imported because at $5 per shirt, our local suppliers never entered the market and spent their time and resources making other stuff. But there's the tariff, right? The world price is still 5, but the local price is 9. How does that work? Pick a major local retailer. Let's call it Targmart. To make things easy, we'll say they make 0 profit. Every time they import a $5 t-shirt, they pay 4. The cost of the t-shirts to them is 9, so you're now going to pay 9. But that's government revenue, right? Money for Uncle Sam. Where does it come from? Every time Targmart imports a $5 shirt, they pay 5 abroad and give 4 to the government for the tariff. How much money is it? What I'm about to draw is going to be wrong. Revenue from tariffs. Remember, that's first paid by Targmart and then passed on to you. So the blue box is the amount of imports we have before the tariff. The quantity we consumed minus the local production is the number of t-shirts we imported. Now, remember, this is going to be wrong at first. If we take the number of t-shirts imported and multiply it by the tariff, we get this box. That's government revenue, but it was paid by you. Targmart wrote the check and then charged you at the register, but we haven't told the whole story, and the size of that box is completely wrong. Here we go again. Remember, world price 5, local price 9, tariff of 4. What happens in local production? Well, our local suppliers can now sell t-shirts for $9 and still be competitive. The local price is 9, and Targmart doesn't have to pay the tariff, so they give the full $9 to the local supplier. So local production moves from here to here. Here's the new value of all t-shirts produced locally at the world price plus the tariff. And look at our producer surplus. They grew from here to here. If you were making t-shirts before the tariff, you're happy. But what about consumer and the demand side of things? So at $5, people were buying cheap t-shirts right and left. That's a good thing. They had more t-shirts and some cash left over in their pocket that they spent on other stuff and maybe more savings. Now, because of the t-shirt tariff, their t-shirts cost went up 80%. The new price is 9, so they buy less. Here's our new level of consumption at our new local price of 9. Depending on their demand for t-shirts, they probably have less money left over at the end of the month for haircuts or concert tickets or savings, even though they're buying fewer. Remember that giant green triangle called consumer surplus? Kind of the measure of all the excess benefits consumers of cheap t-shirts. At the world price, it was here. How big is the consumer surplus triangle now? It shrunk. Here's the new consumer surplus after the tariffs. Who benefits from this? Not the consumer. The supplier of t-shirts? A little. But remember that some of those t-shirt companies didn't exist in the first place. We're about to get into the government revenue, but let's look at the change in overall consumer and producer surplus here because of the tariff. We're looking at it right now. This is it before the tariffs. And here it is after the tariffs. What do you see? First off, and this is really important, the total area is a lot smaller. What happened here? Well, what's this yellow box? That used to be consumer surplus. What is it now? Now it's producer surplus. You're getting fewer t-shirts at 80% higher prices, but the local suppliers are, in a sense, happier now. A lot of that tariff that you are paying is effectively a subsidy to your local t-shirt manufacturers. What's this gray box? That's the value of all the t-shirts we were importing before the tariff. So wait, why did that gray box get smaller? Well, that's the new amount of t-shirts we're importing after the tariff. The width is the quantity and the height is the value of those t-shirts at the world price. Basically, with the tariff, we're producing more, but we're consuming less. So our total imports, yes, have gone down. What's this big white space surrounded by this orange line? That used to be consumer surplus. That was lots of cheap t-shirts and money we freed up for vacations or hamburgers or more savings. Where did all that benefit go? Well, guess what? We could finally calculate government revenue from the t-shirt tariff. Here it is. Take the quantity of t-shirts we're importing since the start of the tariff. That's the width of the gray box here. Now take the amount of the tariffs. That's $4 a shirt. Multiply them together, and here it is. There's your government revenue. What can you spend on this? What can the government spend on this? Anything the government wants. If you think that the government knows better than you how to spend money, well, that's what you got by spending an extra $4 on all of your shirts. That's the tax gain the government makes from you paying 80% more. But wait, there's still some white space left. Look at those two white triangles left on the graph. That used to be consumer surplus. What happened to it? Well, it's gone. It's completely gone. Can we get it back? No, there's no getting it back. It's an irretrievable void. Even if President Larry turned around and used all of that new government revenue to write you a check, you're still worse off than if you had just been able to keep buying cheap t-shirts at $5 instead of 9. Those black triangles are economic inefficiencies. They're voids that you'll never see again. So let's recap. We have a giant section of our consumer surplus green triangle that just shrunk because of tariffs. The cost of your t-shirts just went up by 80%. You're buying fewer t-shirts and spending more on them, and you're not as happy. You still need shirts, but you're going to make do with fewer of them, and also probably buy fewer flower pots and video games and make up for your higher costs. You might reduce your savings. Where did all of your consumer surplus go? Well, a bit of it went to local companies that make t-shirts. Another small bit of it went to the government. What do they spend it on? I don't know. If you think the government knows how to spend money better than you, this is a good thing. Maybe they'll lower your other taxes, but those other lower taxes are just paid for by this new import tax. The rest is just gone. Even if the government gives you back that green rectangle in the form of a big check, it's gone forever. And if they tried to fill those in with even bigger checks, then they're spending more than the increase in revenue from the tariff. They're government inefficiencies. So why do this? Why inject all of that inefficiency in support of a local supplier? Well, in some cases, you might do it for an individual industry or a small set of industries with a strategic national interest. Take steel. Imagine if local steel manufacturers can't keep up at all, and all of the domestic steel companies go bankrupt, and all steel is imported. Then there's a war with the people you import steel from, or there's some other shock to world trade. You're out of luck. Can you build or repair your Navy without a domestic steel industry? Or more recently, microchips. What happens if the world trade in microchips collapses and everything that you make, even locally, requires microchips? You might use tariffs or subsidies to make sure that you maintain viable companies in strategic industries locally so that they can ramp up more if there is a problem with world trade, that hits us. Those now red triangles of inefficiency are still there, but basically, collectively, the country has decided that they're worth the price of those inefficiencies when applied to a few key industries for the national interest. But t-shirts, bobbleheads, headphones? What about food like blueberries in February or avocados? Do we need to protect the spatula industry? And it gets a lot worse than this. There are other forces at play because we're not just talking tariffs on a handful of industries or just t-shirts. This is everything. Tariffs across the board will cause follow-on effects in the local economy as well that will make those red triangles of inefficiency even worse. I'll try to make a round two to show all of that. Until then, thanks a lot. Thanks for your time. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.